I never thought my grandmother would be the one to destroy me. Not the woman who baked cinnamon rolls every Sunday morning, filling the house with that warm, sweet scent that clung to the curtains and made you feel like everything in the world was safe. Not the woman who sat in her rocking chair by the window, the one with the faded floral cushion, humming old hymns while the afternoon light painted gold stripes across the hardwood floor. But that is exactly what she did, and she did it so quietly, so carefully, that by the time I understood what was happening, there was nothing left of the life I had built. My name is Caroline, and I am 32 years old. I live in a small town in Ohio where everyone knows everyone, where secrets are supposed to be impossible, but somehow thrive in the spaces between Sunday services and grocery store aisles. My grandmother, Dorothy, is 87. She has lived in the same house for 60 years, the house where my mother grew up, the house where I spent every summer as a child, catching fireflies in mason jars and sleeping on the screened-in porch while crickets sang their endless song. It started 3 years ago, though I did not see it then. I was too busy, too wrapped up in my own life. I had just gotten engaged to Marcus, a man I met at a charity fundraiser in Columbus. He was kind, steady, with dark eyes that crinkled when he smiled and hands that were always warm. He worked as a physical therapist, and he had this way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. My grandmother seemed to like him at first. She would pat his hand when he visited, offer him second helpings of pot roast, ask him about his family. But something changed. I cannot pinpoint the exact moment, but I remember the feeling. It was a Sunday in October, the kind of day when the air smells like wood smoke and dying leaves, when the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. We were sitting in her living room, Marcus and I on the old floral couch that sagged in the middle, my grandmother in her chair. The television was on low, some cooking show she liked, and the room was warm, almost too warm, the radiator clanking and hissing in the corner. Marcus was telling a story about one of his patients, an older man who had learned to walk again after a stroke. My grandmother was nodding, smiling, but her eyes were different. They were watching him with a sharpness I had never seen before, like she was studying him, measuring him against some invisible standard. When he finished talking, she said something that seemed harmless at the time. She said, "Marcus, you are a good man, but I wonder if you know what it takes to be part of this family." He laughed, a little nervous, and said he hoped he would learn. She did not laugh back. She just looked at him, and then at me, and something cold settled in my stomach. I brushed it off. I told myself she was just being protective, that she wanted to make sure I was making the right choice. But that was the beginning. Over the next few months, small things started to happen. My grandmother would call me, her voice thin and wavering over the phone, and tell me she was worried about Marcus. She said she had heard things, though she would never say what or from whom. She said he seemed secretive, that he did not look her in the eye the way an honest man should. I defended him, of course. I told her she was imagining things, that Marcus was the most honest person I knew. But her words planted seeds, tiny doubts that I tried to ignore but that grew anyway, in the dark corners of my mind. Then she started talking to other people. My mother first. My mother lived 2 hours away in Cleveland, and she and my grandmother talked every week. I did not know what was said in those conversations, but I noticed my mother started asking me strange questions. Was Marcus good with money? Did he have any ex-girlfriends I should know about? Did I really know him as well as I thought I did? I was annoyed, defensive. I told her to stop listening to Grandma, that Grandma was just being paranoid. But my mother had always trusted her own mother more than anyone, and I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes too. My grandmother also talked to my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who lived in town and visited her almost every day. Linda was the kind of person who loved drama, who thrived on gossip and speculation. She would sit at my grandmother's kitchen table, drinking instant coffee from a chipped mug, and the two of them would talk in low voices that stopped when I walked in. I started to feel like I was on the outside of something, like there was a conversation happening about my life that I was not allowed to hear. Marcus started to notice. He said my family felt different around him, colder. He said my mother barely looked at him at Thanksgiving, that my Aunt Linda had asked him pointed questions about his job, his finances, his past relationships. He asked me what was going on, and I did not know what to tell him. I did not want to believe that my grandmother, the woman who had always been my safe place, was turning my family against the man I loved. But she was, and she was doing it so carefully, so skillfully, that no one could see her hand in it. She never said anything outright. She never accused Marcus of anything specific. She just asked questions, made observations, sighed in that way that suggested she knew something she was not saying. And people listened, because she was Dorothy, because she was the matriarch, because she had lived long enough to be considered wise. The wedding was supposed to be in June. We had picked a venue, a restored barn outside of town with string lights and wildflowers, the kind of place that looked like something out of a magazine. I was excited, nervous, happy. But as spring arrived, as the dogwoods bloomed and the air turned soft and green, I started to feel a pressure I could not name. My mother kept suggesting we wait, that there was no rush, that Marcus and I should take more time to be sure. My Aunt Linda said she had heard from someone, she would not say who, that Marcus had been seen having lunch with a woman in Columbus, someone who was not me. I confronted Marcus about it. We were in his apartment, a small one-bedroom with big windows that let in too much light. He looked at me like I had slapped him. He said yes, he had lunch with a woman, his cousin, who was visiting from out of state. He showed me pictures on his phone, pictures of the two of them with his aunt, all of them smiling. I felt like an idiot. I apologized, but something had shifted. He could see that I had doubted him, and it hurt him. I could see it in the way he looked at me, like he was wondering if I really trusted him at all. I went to my grandmother's house the next day. I needed to talk to her, to ask her to stop, to tell her that she was ruining everything. It was a rainy afternoon, the kind of rain that is soft and steady, drumming on the roof and turning the world gray. I let myself in through the back door, the way I always did, and I found her in the kitchen, standing at the counter, cutting vegetables for soup. The smell of onions and celery filled the air, sharp and clean. I said, "Grandma, we need to talk." She looked up at me, her face calm, her hands still moving with the knife. She said, "Of course, sweetheart. What is on your mind?" I told her everything. I told her that I knew she had been talking to my mother, to my aunt, that she had been planting doubts about Marcus. I told her that it was not fair, that she did not really know him, that she was judging him based on nothing. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it shook. I felt like a child again, small and powerless in front of her. She put down the knife and wiped her hands on a dish towel, slowly, deliberately. She looked at me with those sharp eyes, and she said, "Caroline, I am only trying to protect you. I have seen men like Marcus before. They are charming, they say all the right things, but they are not what they seem." I asked her what she meant. I asked her to tell me one specific thing, one real reason why she did not trust him. She just shook her head and said, "You will understand someday. You will thank me." I left her house angry, frustrated, feeling like I was losing my mind. But I also felt something else, something darker. I felt afraid. Afraid that she was right, afraid that I was wrong, afraid that I could not trust my own judgment anymore. The wedding was postponed. I told people it was because of work, because Marcus had a big project and we wanted to wait until things calmed down. But the truth was, I was not sure anymore. I was not sure about Marcus, not sure about my family, not sure about anything. And my grandmother had done that. She had taken my certainty and turned it into doubt, and she had done it without ever raising her voice or saying a cruel word. Marcus and I started fighting. Small things at first, stupid things like whose turn it was to do the dishes or what movie to watch. But underneath, there was something bigger, something we could not name. He felt like I did not trust him. I felt like he did not understand what I was going through. We stopped talking as much. We stopped laughing. The space between us grew wider, colder, until one day in August, he said maybe we should take a break. I agreed. I did not want to, but I did not know what else to do. He moved his things out of my apartment on a Saturday morning, the air thick and humid, the sky threatening rain that never came. I watched him carry boxes to his car, and I felt like I was watching my life fall apart in slow motion. He hugged me before he left, and I could feel his heart beating against mine, fast and sad. He said, "I love you, Caroline. I hope you figure out what you want." I did not know what I wanted. I only knew what I had lost. I spent the next few weeks in a fog. I went to work, came home, sat on my couch and stared at the television without really seeing it. My mother called every few days, her voice full of sympathy that felt false, like she was relieved that things had ended. My Aunt Linda said it was for the best, that I would find someone better. And my grandmother, she said nothing. She just invited me over for Sunday dinner like always, like nothing had happened, like she had not orchestrated the whole thing. I went, because I did not know what else to do. I sat at her table and ate her pot roast and listened to her talk about the weather, about the neighbors, about anything except Marcus. And I felt numb, empty, like I was watching my life from the outside. It was not until October, a full year after that first strange Sunday, that I started to understand what had really happened. I was at my Aunt Linda's house, helping her clean out her garage. We were sorting through boxes of old clothes and books, the air dusty and smelling of mildew, when I found a stack of letters. They were tied with a rubber band, yellowed with age, and they were addressed to my grandmother. I should not have read them. I know that, but something made me pull one out, unfold it, scan the lines of faded handwriting. It was from my grandfather, written before he and my grandmother were married. And in it, he talked about another woman, someone he had been seeing, someone his family did not approve of. He wrote about how hard it was to let her go, how much it hurt, but how he knew it was the right thing to do because his family knew best. I read another letter, and another. They all said the same thing. My grandfather had been in love with someone else, but my grandmother and her family had convinced him to leave her, to marry my grandmother instead. And he had done it. He had given up the woman he loved because he was told it was the right thing to do. I felt sick. I put the letters back, my hands shaking, and I did not say anything to my aunt. But I could not stop thinking about it. My grandmother had done to my grandfather exactly what she had done to me. She had taken his choice away, manipulated him into a life he had not chosen. And she had done it because she believed she knew better, because she thought she had the right to control other people's lives. I confronted her the next Sunday. I brought the letters with me, the stack of them heavy in my bag. I walked into her house without knocking, and I found her in the living room, sitting in her chair, the television on low. The room smelled like lavender and old paper, the smell of her life, the smell I had always associated with safety. I threw the letters on the coffee table in front of her. I said, "I know what you did. I know what you did to Grandpa, and I know what you did to me." She looked at the letters, and then at me. Her face did not change. She did not look surprised or ashamed. She just looked tired, old, like the weight of all her years had suddenly settled on her shoulders. She said, "I did what I had to do." I asked her how she could say that, how she could think it was okay to ruin people's lives, to take away their choices. She shook her head slowly, and she said, "You do not understand, Caroline. I saved your grandfather from a mistake. That woman he loved, she was not right for him. She would have made him miserable. And Marcus, he is not right for you. I can see it, even if you cannot." I told her she was wrong. I told her she had no right to decide what was best for me, that I was an adult, that my life was my own. But she just looked at me with those sharp, unyielding eyes, and she said, "You will see. Someday, you will understand that I was trying to protect you." I left her house that day, and I did not go back. I stopped answering her calls, stopped visiting on Sundays. My mother was upset, said I was being cruel, that my grandmother was old and did not have much time left. But I could not forgive her. I could not sit at her table and pretend that everything was fine, that she had not destroyed the best thing in my life. I tried to reach out to Marcus. I called him, texted him, showed up at his apartment. But he had moved on. He was seeing someone else, a woman he had met at work, someone who trusted him, who did not question his every move. He was kind when he told me, but firm. He said he still cared about me, but he could not go back to the way things were. He said he needed to be with someone who believed in him. I understood. I hated it, but I understood. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. I felt like I was grieving, not just for Marcus, but for the person I had been before my grandmother got into my head. I had always thought of myself as strong, independent, sure of what I wanted. But she had shown me how easily I could be manipulated, how quickly I could lose faith in myself. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Brennan, who had an office above a coffee shop downtown. The room always smelled like espresso and old books, and there was a white noise machine in the corner that hummed softly, covering the sounds from the street below. I told her everything, about my grandmother, about Marcus, about the letters. She listened without judgment, and she helped me see that what my grandmother had done was not love. It was control. It was a need to shape the world according to her own vision, regardless of the cost to the people she claimed to care about. Dr. Brennan said that people like my grandmother often believe they are acting out of love, that they genuinely think they know what is best. But that does not make it right. It does not make it any less damaging. I started to rebuild my life, slowly, piece by piece. I focused on my work, on my friendships, on the things that made me feel like myself again. I started running in the mornings, the cold air burning my lungs, my feet pounding the pavement in a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat, like proof that I was still alive. I started painting again, something I had not done since college, filling canvases with colors that had no meaning except that they felt right. And I started to let go of the anger. Not because my grandmother deserved forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. It was almost 2 years later when I got the call. It was my mother, her voice tight and strange. She said my grandmother had fallen, that she was in the hospital, that it did not look good. I felt a complicated knot of emotions, grief and anger and guilt all tangled together. I did not want to go, but I knew I had to. The hospital was cold and bright, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of disinfectant sharp in my nose. I found my grandmother in a room at the end of a long hallway, my mother and Aunt Linda sitting beside her bed. She looked small, shrunken, her skin papery and pale against the white sheets. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow and labored. My mother stood up when she saw me, hugged me tight. She whispered, "I am glad you came." I sat down in the chair on the other side of the bed, and I looked at my grandmother. I tried to feel something, sadness or love or even anger, but all I felt was emptiness. This woman had shaped so much of my life, had been such a constant presence, and now she was fading away, and I did not know what to feel. She opened her eyes after a while, and she looked at me. Her gaze was cloudy, unfocused, but I could see recognition there. She tried to speak, her lips moving, but no sound came out. I leaned closer, and she tried again. She whispered, "I am sorry." I did not know if she meant it. I did not know if she understood what she was apologizing for, or if she was just saying what she thought I wanted to hear. But I nodded, and I took her hand, and I said, "I know." She died 3 days later, in the early morning, when the sky was just starting to turn gray. My mother called me, crying, and I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. The woman who had controlled so much of my life was gone, and I was free. The funeral was small, held at the church she had attended for 60 years. The pews smelled like old wood and candle wax, and the light coming through the stained glass windows painted colors across the floor, reds and blues and golds. People stood up and talked about what a wonderful woman she had been, how kind, how generous, how wise. I sat in the front row and listened, and I did not say anything. I could not stand up and lie, but I also could not stand up and tell the truth. After the service, we went back to her house to sort through her things. It felt strange to be there, to walk through the rooms that had once felt so safe and now felt like a museum, a place full of objects that had lost their meaning. My mother and Aunt Linda went through her closet, her kitchen, her drawers, dividing up her belongings. I wandered into the living room and sat in her chair, the one by the window. I found a box under the side table, a small wooden box with a latch. Inside were more letters, dozens of them, all from my grandfather. I read through them, one by one, and I saw the story of a man who had given up everything he wanted because he was told it was the right thing to do. He had married my grandmother, had children with her, had built a life with her, but he had never been happy. I could see it in the words, in the way he wrote about duty and responsibility, but never about love. And at the bottom of the box, I found a photograph. It was old, the edges worn, the colors faded. It showed a young woman, beautiful, with dark hair and a bright smile. On the back, in my grandfather's handwriting, it said, Margaret, 1953. Margaret, the woman he had loved. The woman my grandmother had made him leave. I put the photograph in my pocket. I did not tell my mother or my aunt about it. It felt like a secret that belonged to me now, a piece of the truth that I could carry with me. We finished sorting through the house, and we locked the door behind us. My mother said she would put it on the market, that there was no reason to keep it. I agreed. I did not want to come back here, did not want to walk through these rooms and remember. Life went on. I kept working, kept running, kept painting. I went on a few dates, nothing serious, just testing the waters, seeing if I could trust someone again. It was hard. Every time I started to feel something, I would hear my grandmother's voice in my head, asking questions, planting doubts. But I was learning to ignore it, to trust myself instead. And then one day in April, I ran into Marcus. It was at a farmer's market downtown, the air warm and smelling like fresh bread and flowers. I was looking at a table of strawberries, bright red and perfect, when I heard someone say my name. I turned, and there he was. He looked the same, maybe a little older, a few more lines around his eyes. He was alone, carrying a canvas bag full of vegetables. We stared at each other for a moment, and then he smiled, that same warm smile I remembered. He said, "Caroline, it is good to see you." We talked for a while, standing there in the middle of the market, people flowing around us. He told me about his life, his work, his family. He did not mention the woman he had been seeing, and I did not ask. I told him about my life, about my grandmother's death, about the therapy, about the painting. He listened, really listened, the way he always had. Before we parted, he said, "I am glad you are doing well. You deserve to be happy. I said, so do you. He nodded, and then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there for a long time, holding a basket of strawberries, feeling something I had not felt in years. Not regret, exactly, but a kind of bittersweet acceptance. Marcus and I were not going to get back together. That door was closed. But seeing him, talking to him, reminded me of who I had been when I was with him. Someone who was capable of love, of trust, of joy. My grandmother had tried to take that away from me, but she had not succeeded. Not completely. I was still here, still standing, still capable of feeling. And that was something. I started to think about forgiveness, not for my grandmother's sake, but for my own. Dr. Brennan had talked about this, about how holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. My grandmother was gone. She could not hurt me anymore, but I was still carrying the weight of what she had done, and it was exhausting. So I decided to let it go. Not to forget, not to pretend it had not happened, but to stop letting it define me. I wrote a letter, not to my grandmother, but to myself. I wrote about everything that had happened, about the pain and the anger and the loss. And then I wrote about what I had learned, about how I was stronger now, more aware, more careful about who I let into my life and into my head. I burned the letter in my fireplace one evening, watching the paper curl and blacken, the words disappearing into smoke. It felt like a ritual, like I was releasing something I had been holding on to for too long. Spring turned into summer, and I started to feel lighter. I went on a trip with some friends, a week at a cabin in the mountains, where the air was thin and clean and the nights were full of stars. We hiked during the day, cooked meals together in the evenings, sat around a fire, and talked about everything and nothing. It was the first time in years that I felt truly at peace. When I got back, I decided to make some changes. I quit my job, the one I had been doing for 10 years, the one that paid well but left me feeling empty. I started freelancing, doing graphic design work from home, taking on projects that interested me. It was scary, not having the security of a steady paycheck, but it was also exhilarating. I was making choices for myself, based on what I wanted, not what I thought I should do. I also started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, helping with their newsletter and social media. It felt good to use my skills for something meaningful, to help people who were trying to rebuild their lives after trauma. I met women who had been through things I could not imagine, who had survived abuse and loss and betrayal, and who were still fighting, still hoping, still believing that things could get better. They inspired me. One of the women I met was named Jasmine. She was 25, with a young daughter, and she had left an abusive relationship 6 months earlier. She was smart, funny, resilient, but she was also scared. Scared of being alone, scared of making the wrong choices, scared of trusting the wrong person again. I saw so much of myself in her. We became friends. I would bring her coffee, help her with her resume, watch her daughter sometimes so she could go to job interviews. And I would talk to her about trust, about how hard it is to rebuild after someone has broken it, but how important it is to try. I told her about Marcus, about my grandmother, about how I had learned to trust myself again. She listened, and she said, "You are brave. I hope I can be like you someday." I told her she already was. It was around this time that I met Daniel. He was a teacher, working at the high school across town, and he came into the coffee shop where I sometimes worked on my laptop. He had sandy hair and glasses and a quiet, thoughtful way of speaking. We started talking one day about books, about art, about the town. He asked if I wanted to get dinner sometime, and I said yes. I was nervous. I had not been on a real date in years, and I was afraid of falling into old patterns, of letting doubt creep in, of hearing my grandmother's voice in my head. But Daniel was patient. He did not push, did not ask for more than I was ready to give. We took things slow, getting to know each other, building trust one conversation at a time. He told me about his life, about his family, about the students he taught. He talked about his ex-wife, about how they had grown apart, about how hard it had been to accept that sometimes love is not enough. I appreciated his honesty, the way he did not try to hide his past or pretend he had all the answers. I told him about Marcus, about my grandmother, about everything. I was afraid he would think I was damaged, too complicated, too much work. But he just listened, and then he said, "We all have scars, Caroline. It is how we heal from them that matters." We dated for a year before he asked me to move in with him. It was a big step, one that terrified me, but I said yes. His house was small, cozy, with a backyard full of wildflowers and a porch where we could sit in the evenings and watch the sun go down. It felt like a fresh start, like I was finally building a life that was mine, not shaped by anyone else's expectations or fears. My mother was cautiously supportive. She liked Daniel, said he seemed steady, reliable. But I could tell she was worried, afraid I would get hurt again. I understood. She had watched me fall apart after Marcus, and she did not want to see me go through that again. But I was different now. I knew what I wanted, and I knew what I would not tolerate. I had boundaries, and I was not afraid to enforce them. My Aunt Linda was less supportive. She made comments, little digs, about how I was rushing into things, about how I barely knew Daniel, about how I should be more careful. I recognized the pattern, the same one my grandmother had used, and I shut it down immediately. I told her that my relationship was not her business, that I appreciated her concern, but I did not need her advice. She was offended, but I did not care. I was done letting other people control my life. Daniel and I built a life together, slowly, carefully. We cooked meals together, planted a garden, adopted a dog, a scruffy mutt named Charlie who loved to chase squirrels and sleep on the couch. We had our disagreements, of course, moments when we did not see eye to eye, but we talked through them. We did not let things fester, did not let doubt take root. We trusted each other, and we trusted ourselves. It was not perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. 2 years after my grandmother died, I went back to her house. My mother had finally sold it, and the new owners were moving in the following week. She asked if I wanted to walk through one last time, to say goodbye. I was not sure I did, but I went anyway. The house was empty, the furniture gone, the walls bare. It looked smaller than I remembered, less significant. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, and I tried to feel something. Nostalgia, sadness, anger. But all I felt was a kind of quiet closure. I stood in the living room, in the spot where her chair had been, and I thought about all the years I had spent here, all the memories, good and bad. I thought about the woman my grandmother had been, complicated, controlling, convinced she knew best. I thought about the damage she had done, to my grandfather, to me, to who knows how many others. But I also thought about the lessons I had learned, about the importance of trust, of boundaries, of listening to my own voice instead of letting others drown it out. My grandmother had tried to shape my life, but in the end, she had only shaped my understanding of who I did not want to be. I walked out of the house and closed the door behind me. I did not look back. Life continued to unfold, in ways I could not have predicted. Daniel and I got married, a small ceremony in our backyard, just close friends and family. My mother cried, happy tears this time, and even my Aunt Linda seemed genuinely pleased. We honeymooned in Maine, staying in a little cottage by the ocean, where the air smelled like salt and pine, and the sound of the waves was a constant, soothing presence. I kept working, kept volunteering, kept painting. I found a gallery that agreed to show some of my work, and I sold a few pieces, which felt like a validation I had not known I needed. Daniel encouraged me, always, never trying to steer me in one direction or another, just supporting whatever I wanted to do. Jasmine, the woman I had met at the shelter, got back on her feet. She found a job, got her own apartment, started building a life for herself and her daughter. She invited me to her daughter's birthday party, a small gathering in a park, with balloons and cake and children running around. I watched her, laughing and relaxed, and I felt proud. Proud of her, and proud of myself for being part of her journey. I thought about my grandmother sometimes, usually when I was faced with a decision, a moment when I had to choose between what I wanted and what someone else thought I should do. I would hear her voice, that soft, insistent voice, telling me she knew best, and I would push it away, gently but firmly, and I would make my own choice. Because that was the thing my grandmother never understood. Love is not about control. It is not about shaping someone into what you think they should be. It is about trusting them to make their own choices, even when those choices are different from what you would choose. It is about supporting them, not steering them. I wish I could say I forgave her completely, that I let go of all the anger and hurt. But that would not be true. Some wounds leave scars, and some scars never fully fade. But I learned to live with them, to see them not as weaknesses but as reminders of what I had survived, of how far I had come. Daniel and I talked about having children, a conversation that filled me with both excitement and fear. I was afraid of repeating the patterns I had seen, of becoming like my grandmother, of trying to control my children's lives instead of letting them live their own. But Daniel reminded me that awareness is half the battle, that knowing what not to do is just as important as knowing what to do. We decided to try, and a year later, I found out I was pregnant. It was terrifying and wonderful, a mix of emotions I could not untangle. I spent the pregnancy reading books, talking to Dr. Brennan, trying to prepare myself for the responsibility of raising a human being, of shaping a life without controlling it. Our daughter was born on a cold morning in January, the world outside covered in snow, everything quiet and still. We named her Grace because that is what she felt like, a gift, a second chance, a new beginning. Holding her for the first time, feeling her tiny weight in my arms, I made a promise. I promised to love her, to support her, to let her make her own choices, even when those choices scared me. I promised to be the kind of mother my grandmother never was, the kind of mother I wished I had had. Raising Grace was hard, harder than I had imagined. There were sleepless nights, endless worries, moments when I doubted every decision I made. But there were also moments of pure joy, of watching her discover the world, of seeing her personality emerge, bright and curious and stubborn. She looked like Daniel, with his sandy hair and thoughtful eyes, but she had my determination, my refusal to be told what to do. I saw it early, the way she would push back when we tried to guide her, the way she insisted on doing things her own way. And instead of trying to break that spirit, I nurtured it. I encouraged her to ask questions, to explore, to make mistakes and learn from them. My mother was a doting grandmother, but I watched her carefully, alert for any signs that she might try to do what her mother had done. There were moments when I saw it, the urge to control, to offer unsolicited advice, to suggest that she knew better. But I shut it down, kindly but firmly. I told her that Daniel and I were Grace's parents, that we would make the decisions about how to raise her, and that while we appreciated her input, we did not need her direction. She was hurt at first, but she adjusted. She learned to step back, to offer support without trying to take over. And our relationship improved because of it. We were able to enjoy each other's company without the tension, without the unspoken power struggle. My Aunt Linda was a different story. She could not help herself, could not resist making comments about how we were raising Grace, about how we were too lenient, too permissive, too willing to let her make her own choices. I stopped inviting her over as much, limited our interactions to holidays and special occasions. It was not worth the stress, not worth exposing Grace to that kind of negativity. Grace grew, as children do, faster than I could believe. She started school, made friends, developed interests. She loved art, like me, and science, like Daniel. She was curious about everything, always asking why, always wanting to understand how things worked. We encouraged her, bought her books and art supplies and science kits, took her to museums and parks and libraries. And I watched her, always looking for signs that I was doing it right, that I was not repeating the mistakes of the past. Dr. Brennan told me that this was normal, that all parents worry about messing up their kids, but that the fact that I was aware, that I was trying, meant I was probably doing better than I thought. When Grace was 7, she came home from school one day upset. She said her teacher had told her she could not draw during math class, that she needed to focus on her work. Grace loved to draw, used it as a way to think, to process information. I understood, because I was the same way. But the teacher saw it as a distraction, as something that needed to be corrected. I went to the school and talked to the teacher, a young woman named Miss Peterson, who seemed overwhelmed and exhausted. I explained that Grace was not trying to be disruptive, that drawing helped her concentrate, that it was part of how she learned. Miss Peterson was skeptical, but she agreed to let Grace draw as long as she was completing her work. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. I was advocating for my daughter, standing up for her needs, refusing to let someone else dictate how she should be. It was the opposite of what my grandmother had done, and it felt right. Grace thrived. She continued to draw, to ask questions, to push boundaries in ways that were healthy and normal. She was not perfect, of course. She had tantrums, made mistakes, tested our patience. But she was also kind, empathetic, thoughtful. She cared about other people, about animals, about the world around her. Daniel and I were proud of her, but more than that, we were proud of ourselves. We were raising a child who was confident, who trusted herself, who was not afraid to be who she was. And that felt like the best revenge against my grandmother's legacy, the best way to prove that her way was not the only way, not the right way. When Grace was 10, my mother got sick. It was cancer, aggressive and fast-moving. She went from diagnosis to hospice in a matter of months, and I spent those months by her side, holding her hand, talking to her, trying to make her comfortable. In those final weeks, she talked about my grandmother. She said she understood now, understood why I had been so angry, why I had pulled away. She said she wished she had stood up to her mother, had protected me better. She said she was sorry. I told her it was okay, that I had forgiven her, and I meant it. My mother had been caught in the middle, torn between her loyalty to her mother and her love for me. She had made mistakes, but she had also tried, in her own way, to do what she thought was right. She died on a Tuesday morning, the sun streaming through the window of her hospice room, the air smelling like flowers and antiseptic. I was holding her hand when she took her last breath, and I felt a deep, aching sadness, but also a sense of peace. She was free now, free from pain, free from the weight of her mother's expectations. We buried her next to my grandmother, in the cemetery on the edge of town. It was a gray day, the sky heavy with clouds, the air cold and damp. Grace stood beside me, holding my hand, her face serious and sad. She had loved her grandmother, and she did not understand why she had to die. I told her that death is a part of life, that everyone dies eventually, but that the people we love stay with us, in our memories, in the things they taught us. She nodded, but I could see she did not really understand. She was too young, but she would someday. Life went on, as it always does. Daniel and I kept working, kept raising Grace, kept building our life together. We had our struggles, our moments of doubt, our times when we wondered if we were doing enough, doing it right. But we also had our joys, our triumphs, our moments of connection that made everything else worthwhile. Grace grew into a teenager, moody and complicated and wonderful. She pushed back against us, tested boundaries, made choices we did not always agree with. But we let her, because that was what she needed. We were there to guide her, to support her, to catch her when she fell, but we did not try to control her. We trusted her to find her own way. And she did. She found her passion, her voice, her path. She wanted to be an artist, to create things that made people feel, that made them think. We encouraged her, helped her apply to art schools, supported her dreams even when they scared us. When she left for college, I cried. Not because I was sad, though I was, but because I was proud. Proud of her, proud of us, proud of the fact that we had raised a child who was confident enough to leave, to pursue her own life, to trust herself. Daniel and I were alone again, just the two of us and Charlie, who was old now, gray around the muzzle, moving slowly. We adjusted, found new rhythms, new ways to fill our days. We traveled, took up new hobbies, spent time with friends. We were happy in a quiet, contented way. I thought about my grandmother often during this time, about the choices she had made, the damage she had done. I thought about my grandfather, about the life he had given up, the happiness he had sacrificed. I thought about Marcus, about the love I had lost because I had let someone else's doubts become my own. But I also thought about what I had gained. I had learned to trust myself, to set boundaries, to choose my own path. I had built a life that was mine, not shaped by anyone else's expectations or fears. I had raised a daughter who was strong and independent and kind. And I had found love again, real love, the kind that is built on trust and respect and mutual support. My grandmother had tried to destroy me, but she had failed. She had tried to shape me into what she thought I should be, but I had refused. I had taken the broken pieces of my life and put them back together, not the way they were before, but in a new way, a better way. And that, I realized, was the real victory. Not that I had forgiven her, not that I had forgotten what she had done, but that I had survived it. I had taken the worst thing that had ever happened to me and turned it into something that made me stronger, wiser, more compassionate. I started writing about my experience, not for publication, but for myself. I wrote about my grandmother, about Marcus, about the journey I had taken from brokenness to healing. I wrote about the lessons I had learned, about the importance of trust and boundaries and self-awareness. And I wrote about hope, about the fact that even when someone tries to destroy you, you can rebuild, you can survive, you can thrive. Dr. Brennan encouraged me to share my story, said it might help other people who were going through similar experiences. I was hesitant at first, afraid of being judged, afraid of exposing my pain to strangers. But I also knew that silence perpetuates harm, that by not talking about what my grandmother had done, I was allowing that kind of behavior to continue unchallenged. So I started a blog, writing under a pseudonym at first, sharing my story in pieces. The response was overwhelming. People reached out, told me their own stories, thanked me for putting into words what they had been feeling. I heard from women who had been manipulated by their mothers, their grandmothers, their aunts. I heard from men who had been controlled by their families, who had given up their dreams because they were told it was the right thing to do. I realized that my grandmother's behavior was not unique, that there were countless people out there who had been damaged by family members who claimed to love them, but who really just wanted to control them. And I realized that by sharing my story, I was helping to break that cycle, to give people permission to set boundaries, to choose their own paths, to trust themselves. The blog grew, and eventually I was asked to write a book. It was terrifying, the idea of putting my story out there in such a permanent way, but it was also exciting. I spent a year writing, revising, pouring my heart onto the page. Daniel supported me through it, read drafts, offered feedback, reminded me why I was doing this when I wanted to give up. The book was published on a Tuesday in October, exactly 10 years after that first strange Sunday when my grandmother had started her campaign against Marcus. It felt like a full-circle moment, like I was reclaiming that time, that pain, and turning it into something meaningful. The book did well, better than I had expected. It resonated with people, sparked conversations about family dynamics, about control and manipulation, about the difference between love and possession. I did interviews, spoke at events, connected with readers who told me that my story had helped them understand their own experiences, had given them the courage to make changes in their own lives. Grace was proud of me, said she had always known I was brave. Daniel said he was not surprised, that he had always believed in me. And I felt, for the first time in a long time, like I had found my purpose, my voice, my way of making a difference. But even as I celebrated these successes, I never forgot where I had come from, what I had been through. I never forgot the pain of losing Marcus, the confusion of being manipulated by someone I trusted, the long, hard work of rebuilding my sense of self. Those experiences were part of me, woven into the fabric of who I was, and I would not erase them even if I could. Because they had taught me something important. They had taught me that love should never come with conditions, that trust should never be weaponized, that family should be a source of support, not control. They had taught me to listen to my own voice, to trust my own judgment, to set boundaries and enforce them. And they had taught me that healing is possible, that even the deepest wounds can close, that even the most broken pieces can be put back together. I thought about my grandfather sometimes, about the life he had lived, the choices he had made. I wondered if he had been happy, if he had ever regretted leaving Margaret, if he had ever resented my grandmother for pushing him into a life he had not chosen. I would never know the answers to those questions, but I hoped that wherever he was, he had found peace. And I thought about Marcus, about the man I had loved and lost. I hoped he was happy, that he had found someone who trusted him, who loved him without doubt or fear. I hoped he had forgiven me for not being strong enough to stand up to my grandmother, for letting her doubts become my own. I had forgiven myself, mostly, but I still carried a small ache, a what if that would never be answered. But I also knew that dwelling on the past was not productive, that I could not change what had happened, only how I responded to it. And I had responded by building a life that was full and meaningful, by raising a daughter who was strong and independent, by finding love again with someone who respected me, by using my pain to help others. That was enough. It had to be. Grace came home for Thanksgiving, bringing a boyfriend, a quiet young man named Ethan who studied engineering and played guitar. I watched them together, the way they looked at each other, the way they laughed, the way they seemed so comfortable, so sure. And I felt a pang, not of jealousy but of recognition. They reminded me of Marcus and me, before everything fell apart. I pulled Grace aside one evening, while Daniel and Ethan were doing the dishes. We sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, the air cold and smelling like wood smoke. I asked her if she was happy, if Ethan was good to her, if she trusted him. She looked at me, her eyes serious, and she said, "Yes, Mom. I am happy, and I trust him. But more importantly, I trust myself." I felt tears prick my eyes, and I hugged her tight. That was all I had ever wanted for her to trust herself, to know her own worth, to never let anyone make her doubt who she was. She pulled back and looked at me, and she said, "You taught me that, you know. You taught me to trust myself, to set boundaries, to not let other people control my life. You taught me what love should look like, and what it should not." I told her I was proud of her, and I meant it. She was everything I had hoped she would be, everything my grandmother had tried to prevent me from being. Winter came, cold and quiet. Charlie died peacefully in his sleep, and we buried him in the backyard under the oak tree. It was sad, but also a natural end to a long, good life. Grace came home for the funeral, such as it was, and we stood together in the cold, remembering the scruffy mutt who had been part of our family for so long. Life continued to unfold, in ways both expected and surprising. Daniel retired from teaching, and we talked about traveling, about seeing the world, about all the things we had put off while we were raising Grace and building our careers. We made plans, bought tickets, dreamed about adventures. And I kept writing, kept sharing my story, kept connecting with people who needed to hear that they were not alone, that healing was possible, that they could survive and thrive despite what had been done to them. One day, out of the blue, I got a message through my website. It was from a woman named Margaret, and she said she thought she might be the Margaret from the photograph, the woman my grandfather had loved. She had read my book, had seen the description of the photograph, and something had clicked. She wanted to know if we could talk. I was stunned. I had never expected to find her, had never even thought to look. But here she was reaching out, wanting to connect. I agreed to meet her, and we arranged to have coffee at a small cafe in Columbus, halfway between where we both lived. She was in her late 80s, elegant, with white hair and bright eyes. She looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and sadness, and I could see traces of the young woman from the photograph, the one my grandfather had loved. We talked for hours. She told me about her life, about how she had loved my grandfather, how devastated she had been when he had broken things off. She said she had never understood why, that one day they were planning a future together, and the next he was gone, married to someone else. She had moved on, eventually had married someone else, had children and grandchildren. But she had never forgotten him. I told her about my grandmother, about what I had learned, about the letters and the manipulation. She listened, her face growing sadder and sadder, and when I finished, she said, I always wondered if his family had something to do with it. He was so torn, so conflicted, but I never knew for sure. We sat in silence for a while, both of us processing the weight of what had been lost, the lives that had been shaped by my grandmother's need to control. And then Margaret said something that surprised me. She said, I am glad I met you, Caroline. I am glad to know that he had a family, that his life was not all sadness. And I am glad to know that you broke the cycle, that you did not let her do to you what she did to him. I thanked her, and we hugged before we parted. It felt like a kind of closure, a final piece of the puzzle falling into place. My grandfather had loved and lost, had lived a life that was not entirely his own. But I had learned from his story, had refused to repeat it. And that mattered. I told Daniel about the meeting, and he held me while I cried, not from sadness, but from a kind of overwhelming emotion that I could not name. It was grief and relief and gratitude all mixed together, a recognition of how much had been lost and how much had been gained. Grace graduated from college with honors. Her senior art show a stunning collection of paintings that explored themes of identity and autonomy and family. I stood in the gallery, surrounded by her work, and I felt a pride so intense it was almost painful. She had done this, had created this, had found her voice and used it, and I had helped, by giving her the space to grow, by trusting her to find her own way. She moved to New York after graduation, got a job at a gallery, started building her career. It was hard to have her so far away, but I was happy for her, proud of her independence, her courage. We talked on the phone every week, and she came home for holidays, and that was enough. Daniel and I took our trip, a month-long journey through Europe, visiting museums and cafes and small towns that felt like they were from another time. We walked through cobblestone streets, ate meals that lasted for hours, sat in parks and watched people go by. It was everything we had hoped it would be, a celebration of the life we had built together, the love we had nurtured. And through it all, I carried with me the lessons I had learned, the scars I had earned, the knowledge that I was stronger than I had ever thought possible. My grandmother had tried to break me, but she had only made me more resilient. She had tried to control me, but she had only taught me the value of autonomy. She had tried to destroy my happiness, but she had only made me more determined to find it. I thought about her sometimes, usually when I was faced with a difficult decision, a moment when I had to choose between what was easy and what was right. And I would think about the kind of person she had been, the kind of person I did not want to be. And I would make my choice, confident that it was mine, that it came from my own heart and mind, not from fear or obligation or someone else's expectations. Years passed, as they do. Grace got married to Ethan, the quiet young man who played guitar. The wedding was beautiful, held in a garden in upstate New York, with flowers and music and people who loved them. I watched her walk down the aisle, radiant and confident, and I felt a deep, abiding joy. She had found her person, her partner, someone who respected her and supported her and loved her for who she was. Daniel and I became grandparents, a role that filled us with delight and terror in equal measure. Grace and Ethan had a son, a bright-eyed little boy named Oliver, and then a daughter, a fierce little girl named Ruby. We visited as often as we could, spoiled them shamelessly, delighted in watching them grow. And I was careful, so careful, not to overstep, not to offer unsolicited advice, not to try to control how Grace and Ethan raised their children. I remembered what it had felt like to have my choices questioned, my judgment doubted, and I refused to do that to my daughter. I was there to support, not to direct, and Grace appreciated it. She told me often how grateful she was, how different I was from her great-grandmother, how much she valued my respect for her autonomy. I grew older, as we all do. My hair turned gray, my body slowed down, my memory became less reliable. But my mind stayed sharp, and my heart stayed open, and I continued to write, to share my story, to connect with people who needed to hear it. Daniel and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary, a quiet dinner at home, just the two of us. We talked about the life we had built, the challenges we had faced, the joys we had shared. And we agreed that we had been lucky, not because everything had been easy, but because we had faced the hard things together, with honesty and trust and love. I thought about Marcus sometimes, wondered what had become of him, if he was happy, if he ever thought about me. I hoped he was, hoped he had found the love and trust he deserved. And I hoped he knew somehow that I was sorry, that I had learned from my mistakes, that I had become the person I should have been when I was with him. But mostly I thought about the future, about the legacy I was leaving. Not a legacy of control or manipulation, but a legacy of trust and autonomy and love. I had broken the cycle that my grandmother had started, had refused to pass on the damage she had done. And that, more than anything else, felt like the greatest accomplishment of my life. I wrote a letter to Grace, to be opened after I was gone. In it, I told her how proud I was of her, how much I loved her, how grateful I was to have been her mother. I told her about my grandmother, about the lessons I had learned, about the importance of trusting herself and setting boundaries and choosing her own path. And I told her that she was free, that she owed me nothing, that her life was her own to live as she saw fit. I sealed the letter and put it in a safe place, and I felt a sense of peace. I had done what I could, had lived the best life I knew how, had tried to make the world a little better by sharing my story and breaking the cycle of control. And now, as I sit here in my living room, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, Daniel reading beside me, I feel a deep contentment. My life has not been perfect, has not been easy, but it has been mine. I have made my own choices, followed my own path, trusted my own judgment. And I have survived, thrived, found happiness in spite of everything that was done to try to prevent it. My grandmother plotted my downfall in silence, worked quietly and carefully to destroy the life I was building. But she failed. She failed because I was stronger than she thought, because I learned to trust myself, because I refused to let her voice become louder than my own. And in the end, that is the story I want to tell. Not a story of victimhood, but a story of survival. Not a story of bitterness, but a story of growth. Not a story of what was done to me, but a story of what I did in response. I look at Daniel, and he looks up from his book and smiles at me, that warm, familiar smile that still makes my heart skip a beat after all these years. I reach for his hand, and he takes it, and we sit there together in the quiet afternoon, two people who have built a life based on trust and respect and love. Outside, the world goes on. Cars pass by, neighbors walk their dogs, children play in yards. The sun moves across the sky, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. And inside, in this small, cozy house, I am at peace. I think about all the people who have been part of my journey. Marcus, who taught me what love could be. My grandmother, who taught me what it should not be. My mother, who tried her best despite her own limitations. My Aunt Linda, who showed me the importance of boundaries. Dr. Brennan, who helped me heal. Margaret, who gave me closure. Jasmine, who reminded me of my own strength. And Grace, who gave me purpose, who showed me that breaking the cycle was possible, that love without control was not only possible but beautiful. Each of them shaped me, in ways both good and bad. Each of them taught me something, gave me something, took something away. And all of it, all of the pain and joy and loss and growth, led me here, to this moment, to this life, to this peace. I am 62 years old now, and I have lived a full life. I have loved and lost, and loved again. I have been broken and healed. I have been controlled, and have learned to control my own destiny. I have been silenced, and have found my voice. I have been a daughter, a granddaughter, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a writer, a friend. And through it all, I have been myself. Not the person my grandmother wanted me to be, not the person my mother expected me to be, not the person society told me I should be. Just myself, flawed and complicated and real. That is the victory. That is the triumph. That is the story. My grandmother plotted my downfall in silence, but I rose from the ashes of what she tried to destroy. I rebuilt my life, piece by piece, choice by choice, day by day. And I did it on my own terms, in my own way, with my own voice. And now, as the afternoon fades into evening, as the light grows softer and the shadows grow longer, I sit here with the man I love, in the home we built together, surrounded by the memories of a life well lived. And I am grateful. Grateful for the struggles that made me strong, grateful for the pain that taught me compassion, grateful for the loss that taught me the value of what I have. I am grateful for my life, all of it, the good and the bad, the joy and the sorrow, the triumphs and the failures. Because all of it made me who I am. And who I am is enough. The sun sets, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange and purple. Daniel squeezes my hand, and I squeeze back. We do not need to speak. We understand each other, trust each other, love each other. And that is all that matters. I close my eyes and breathe deeply, feeling the air fill my lungs, feeling my heart beat steady and strong. I am alive. I am here. I am free. And my grandmother, wherever she is, did not win. She tried to destroy me, but I survived. I more than survived. I thrived. That is the story. That is the truth. That is my life. And I would not change a single thing. The evening deepens, the stars begin to appear, one by one, pinpricks of light in the vast darkness. Daniel and I sit together, watching the night unfold, comfortable in the silence, content in each other's presence. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to navigate. But tonight, right now, in this moment, I am at peace. I am whole. I am myself. And that is everything. I think about the young woman I was, 32 years old, engaged to Marcus, full of hope and dreams and certainty. I think about how my grandmother took that certainty and turned it into doubt, how she dismantled my life piece by piece, how she made me question everything I thought I knew. And I think about the woman I am now, 62 years old, married to Daniel, a mother and grandmother, a writer and survivor. I think about how I took the broken pieces of my life and built something new, something stronger, something that was truly mine. The journey from that young woman to this older one was long and hard and painful. But it was also necessary. It taught me things I could not have learned any other way. It made me who I am. And who I am is someone who knows her own worth, who trusts her own judgment, who sets boundaries and enforces them, who loves without conditions, who supports without controlling, who survived what was meant to destroy her and came out stronger on the other side. That is my story. That is my truth. That is my life. And as I sit here in the gathering darkness, Daniel's hand warm in mine, I feel a deep, abiding gratitude. Not for what my grandmother did, but for what I did in response. For the choices I made, the strength I found, the life I built. I survived. I thrived. I won. And that is all that matters. The night is fully dark now, the stars bright overhead, the air cool and still. Daniel and I stand up, stretch, make our way inside. We lock the door behind us, turn off the lights, head upstairs to bed. And as I lay my head on the pillow, Daniel's breathing steady beside me, I close my eyes and smile. I am at peace. I am whole. I am free. And tomorrow, I will wake up and live another day of this beautiful, hard-won life. That is my story. That is my victory. That is my truth.